last panel of the day. This panel is called Markets, Logistics and Urban Types. There are four presenters, Vatsal, Rishikesh, Sanjita and Krisha, and I think this panel discusses a range of things emerging from transactions in market types to transactions with the city through the digital routines and the layers of skin that covers buildings. So with this, I think I would ask Rishikesh to start.
Hello everyone, my name is Rishikesh. My thesis is called Architecture of Transactions. It focuses on the retail spaces and the experiences offered by the various kind of stores. This interest comes from me growing up around my father's business. Through this thesis, I am investigating the influence of the spatial configurations of retail stores. Through this thesis, I am investigating the influence of spatial configuration of retail stores on the transactional capacity of the spaces in a second-tier city. This thesis is located in Nagpur. The city incorporates various kinds of retail spaces. The study looks at three such spaces with varied spatial configurations: counterfront store, departmental store, and mega store. The first case examines a counterfront store, in this case, a stationery shop. This store is located in the Devnagar locality, which offers a mixed fabric of residential and commercial space structures of either bungalows or G plus average 4 floors. The configuration of a counterfront store has three main components, mainly the counter, the vertical element of storage, and at times the extended space in the setback area from the footpath. Here, the main counter acts as a threshold between the buyer and the seller. The transactions that happen in such stores are always across the counter. The products in the storage are physically accessible only to the owner or the staff. The layout of such stores affords efficient purchasing, while the table kept up front showcase the seasonal items available, attracting the passers-by. When one visits such a store, they have a particular requirement to be fulfilled, thus approaching the counter. Since the store is located in a residential area, it receives a repeated clientele, encouraging a personal connect. The next case is of a departmental store. For this case, I have selected a grocery store that my family usually uses. The store is again located in Devnagar locality with commercial structures on the front streets and residential buildings in the inner lanes with independent bungalows and G plus average 4 floors. The configuration of a departmental store has four main components that influence its spatial configurations: counters, free and fixed racks, and various appliances that hold the products. Here, the free furnitures afford the dynamic spatial configuration if and when needed. These kinds of stores afford various ways of transactions. As one enters the store, they come across multiple billing counters. Unlike the previous case of the counterfront store, the thresholds here tend to soften to some degree by allowing the customers to physically interact with the products. This allows them unrestricted exploration of the product. The integration, the interaction with the staff in these kinds of stores extends further as compared to a counterfront store. They seek help in locating the merchandise that is needed or the ones available. This is made easier by segregation of products according to their type. Since the store is located in the vicinity of, of residential buildings, it receives a monthly ration order from specific households, which are to be delivered or picked up later. The next case is of a mega store, which for which I'm looking at my family business. The store is the store has a diversified product range from plywood and laminates to kitchen appliances and more. The store is located in Swavalambhi Nagar on one of the prominent roads of the city. The context of this store is a fabric of commercial buildings on the main street, including various retail stores, hospitals, and restaurants, whereas the inner lane consists of bungalows. The spatial configuration of a megastore has many elements at play. The various counters that have the specific functions and the furniture that the products are displayed upon. In many ways, even the products themselves influence the spatial configurations. For example, in this case, on the second floor, the cupboard and sliding glass partition displays dictate the circulation of the floor. Similar to the departmental store, we can see the evident segregation of the space according to the product type. Upon entering the store, there are multiple counters serving their own functions. As one moves ahead in the store, there is a plywood section that serves both as an inventory and the display, where customers can test the quality hands-on. Proceeding to the first floor, there are three main spaces, each serving a particular purpose. Since the main counter of the ground floor is too open, the private cabin on the first floor is used for more planned meetings and larger transactions. Other spaces on this floor incorporate an experience based display where the kitchen appliance section is set up to represent the cohesion's actual working. There's also a laminate display that gives the customer a better understanding through the full scale sheets. Furthermore, on the second floor, multiple sections simulate the experiences of the products. The investigations in these cases helped me understand the factors that have a larger influence on the retail experience in varying kind of stores. First is the types of transactions that occur in various stores. Throughout the changing spatial arrangements in retail stores, one can see the shift in the type of interactions happening. The kind of store dictates the way activities happen inside the space. The spatial configuration influences the type of staff, customer, and products. Second is the changing transactional capacities through the lens of time. The transactional capacities of the space factor in the aspect of time in terms of daily routine of the space or changing spatial requirements that a customer has changing requirements that a customer has before entering the store to when interacting with the space. This varies from store to store in case of counterfront store, departmental store, and the mega store. Third is the influence of the surface of contact. The transactional capacity of a store is also affected by the degree of involvement of a customer with the products. This makes the porosity of the store very important. Thus, the importance of a relationship with the immediate outside of the store, the footpath and the street. The fourth is the transactions that happen through the extended networks, that is calls or messages, apart from the physical interactions that the space provides. These help in the further outreach of these transactions, showing that the retail experience is more than its physical nature. This varies from one kind of store to another. I have curated my thesis book to explain better how these transactions occur. I urge you to take a look to gain an in-depth understanding. I would like to take this thesis forward so as to look at the future aspirations of a retail store owner in a second tier city and the market at large. Thank you.
Thanks, Rishikesh. I think this thesis discusses the spatial dynamics that emerge in the interfaces in second tier cities, the influx of new stores, and the kind of new expectations and aspirations of the people uh, that elaborate the spatial responses through it. So thanks, Rishikesh. I would ask Vatsal to present his work.
Hello everyone, I am Vatsal. My thesis is titled Bodies in Space, Human Behavior, Gestures and Claims in Market Types. I was keen on looking at the relationship between type, form and body and how bodies behave in space, and to look at these relationships through different market types. From my own self-experience of being into multiple market types, the thesis opened up leading to the question of how do local market types shape human behavior and bodily gestures, and to look at the relationship between body and form at multiple scales. Four market types were looked at during this research. One was Thane Vegetable Market, a street type, Borivali Municipal Market, a shed type, Indraprasth Shopping Center, and Viviana Mall. All of these sites were located around a heavily linked public space like station, and in case of the mall, it itself becomes the public space. There are four smaller questions which this thesis looked at. What is the spatial form of the market? How do bodies perform in space? How does the idea of claims shape human behavior? And how do private and shared spaces get shaped at multiple scales of narratives? Anthropometry of body and form was also one of the important aspects to understand these relationships. Uh, Starting with the street type, I started understanding the zoomed in forms and how they open up clusters and overall form. These narratives look not only at the transactions, but how the gestures and postures get shaped from forms. The open layout of products spread directly on the tarps at the ground level displays, combined with the sellers informally sitting on a low stool, removes physical barriers and invites a low stance for buyer. There are softer boundaries which get generated with the form like tokeries and tarps when placed on ground, which shapes the postures of buyers and sellers, like not stepping on tarp, making him squat. Sellers often sit directly on the ground on stools or stand while selling, with shops being set up through baskets, crates, tarps, and umbrellas. The presence of the bike becomes an extension of her body, where sometimes she rests on the bike, has a chit chat with her nearby friends. Although the bike parking represents a temporary claim on space, it becomes a permanent part of her selling environment. These smaller forms come together and create these clusters along the street. Women vendors often set up their stalls together, usually seated on stool in close proximity to each other. This closeness fosters continuous conversation among the women as they work, forming a sense of community within their small footprint and claiming less space. Unlike the male sellers, who occupy larger areas by spreading tarps on the ground and standing to manage their broader layout, some shop owners permit vendors to use their plinth for a rental fee, also becoming pockets of groupings of sellers, while others use the edges of closed shops and under construction buildings. These clusters come together to form the street market, where the boundaries between formal shops and informal vendors blur, creating a mix where edges aren't fixed but shaped by activity and interactions, as informal vendors carve out spaces using their setups and bodies, creating pockets that sometimes merge with neighboring stalls. These forms repeating along the street soften the market's boundaries, making them permeable. The organic form of the street market allows for more activities than originally intended, like the road and footpath, which was initially designed for movements, now becomes part of the market, accommodating shops, storing goods, displaying objects, mobile vendors, people groupings, and even using one's body as a shop. This partial capacity is shaped by how the space and body enables usage. Elements like form, scale, and materiality allow for specific postures and certain type of bodily engagements, such as sitting on the ground, setting up shops at ground level, or using the plinth of a closed shop for sitting. Moving to the second side, which is a shed type market, arranged along a wide road with a footpath leading to the outer retail shops. Behind these shops, a shed with a corrugated roof shelters a structured layout. Four aisles with evenly sized platforms create an orderly grid-like arrangement. Outside, the open road allows informal vendors to set up along the edges and in pockets, blurring the line between the structured market and the street. The intensity of the bodies inside the shed is more in the center of the aisle where the movement happens, compared to the edges where certain pauses happens for transactions with the seller or product. In peak hours in mornings, the pace of the people moving increases the intensity of bodies as compared to in the afternoon where activities began to slow down, allowing for other activities like sleeping and grouping. Each seller extends their shop on the common aisle, claiming through crates, baskets, and jute bags. The inside of the shed market has only male sellers as compared to the outer street market having women sellers in groups as well. At the street market's outer edge, groups of women and men vendors create a collective presence, arranging their stalls along the divider to support goods and as a place to sit and rest. Shops spread out onto the road, leaving gaps for pedestrians. Inside the market, each seller's platform is both a private selling space and a spot for social interaction that shifts from individual stalls to shared spaces, where sellers gather in the afternoons and evenings to chat and unwind. Fruit sellers, often surrounded by high stacks of crates, create dense, enclosed pockets that feel both private and accessible, sometimes even hiding them from view. Low ground setups shape postures requiring bending and prompting the vendor to stand and hand over the product, creating a more intimate interaction. A vendor with a mobile fruit shop adapts to the market rhythms, moving throughout the day and stopping at key points to draw in customers. His body becomes the shop itself, defined by the form of the bunch of bananas he is carrying. Another vendor claims his spot along the wall, carefully arranging flowers, garlands, and crates into a vertical display along the wall. Aligning at the eye level of the buyer and simply standing in line with them makes interaction more comfortable at a slight distance without the need to bend or move closer. In the afternoon, as the activities start to slow down, some vendors rest by elevating themselves using crates carefully placed beneath head and waist, creating a makeshift sleeping position while not moving the display of loosely placed good vegetables below. Though the form may seem uncomfortable, the vendor adapts, transforming the space to suit his needs while taking a nap. In the evenings, after the markets shut and platforms have been cleared from displays of vegetables, male vendors gather on platforms. These spaces, once bustling with activity, now turn into informal gathering spots, creating a sense of community and connection. Third site, Indraprasth Shopping Center, consists of a central atrium on 2 floors and one basement, with corridors lined with shops on both sides. The layout of the retail spaces is defined by strict edges with openings for counterfront stores, causing the walkways to expand and contract in response. The repetitive pattern of retail edges having glass facades or open counters and their spatial relationship to the corridors creates a clear boundary between the inside and the outside. The materiality and scale of the air-conditioned center encourages more formal buyer-seller interactions. During peak hours, sellers often spill over onto the common corridors, calling potential buyers into their shops. At quieter times, the space shifts to accommodate other activities, with people gathering around the railings in the central atrium or in the corners of shops. Overall movement within the space feels controlled due to the compact scale of the center. The form of the shops is characterized by glass facades having vertical displays with small openings for doors or open counters. Shops often extend their space into the common corridors, claiming the area through display of products like boxes of clothes or mannequins, making customers pause and lean towards it. The central atrium space provides for sellers to group in pockets, often spilling over from nearby shops or engaging in phone calls. In the afternoon, the atrium acts as a social zone where informal interactions unfold. For some shops, the atrium also becomes an extension of their claimed space for temporarily storing goods. The shop edges transform into informal resting spots. A man sits on the granite flooring by the shop's edge in air-conditioned corridors, leaning back on the glass wall in a relaxed posture while taking on a phone call. With shopping activities slowing down, the space fills with a different kind of rhythm where vendors rest, engage with phones, drinking chai, or grouping at the edges of railings. Also, how bodies find their own ways of sitting, like while waiting for his delivery of goods in quieter times, he sits on them while on a call, as there are no other seating spaces for the public. The scale of the corridor also allows for interactions to happen between sellers on opposite sides, making these corridors more than just circulation. Moving on to the mall, the space is laid out in a way that it has a central large atrium with corridors running around it, with shops on one side and open air conditioned atrium on another. Hard edges are created between the retail stores and common corridors through multiple notional and physical layers. The layouts have very conscious space allocation of bulging out of balconies, corridors to cater to groupings. The intensity of human activity is highest in the central atrium, where bodies are concentrated, gradually decreasing as one moves into the corridors and further reducing inside the shops. Overall, the movement within the mall feels more controlled and organized, with bodies moving the slowest, taking more pause points along the common spaces and retail shop edges. The common corridors evolve into spaces for smaller kiosks, which are strategically placed along railings and columns. These kiosks often attract more people than the retail shops as they are located in the common areas. Balconies and railings at the edges of common corridors allow people to take photos, chat, pause, and take breaks while strolling along. Inside the shop, the space is organized with smaller forms, such as strategically placed racks and shelves, leaving narrow gaps for customers to pass through. This arrangement fosters a more formalized shopping experience where buyers create their own micro rooms as they move through the space. These pockets of space allows for groupings to form around a specific product or rack where people shop together in small clusters. The kiosk becomes a pause point where the buying and selling experience becomes very formal with the seller's posture, exuding a sense of class generated through the environment created by air-conditioned atmosphere and reflective surfaces of glass and polished floorings. With most of the benches occupied, people find their own ways of resting and pausing by standing in groups along railings, with few having kids sitting at the corner junctions of the glass railings base, close to the ground, while staring at the vast open mall and enjoying food. People often shop in known groups inside the retail shops as they cluster around shelves in an intimate shared browsing experience for passive shopping, making their own pockets of micro rooms. Without a visible seller to moderate the exchange, shoppers feel free to linger, examine the products, and discuss at their own pace. Most of the open store layouts don't have any formal seating spaces inside them, pushing people to find their ways of sitting on the raised platforms where mannequins are displayed, providing an optimum height that allows for a comfortable resting posture while engaging on a phone, forming personal boundaries within the shared space. To conclude, these forms then helped in understanding the extent of how a body can adapt in space through its physical and psychological boundaries, and how few forms assist or not assist in that. Also, closely understanding their postures and gestures through the logic of anthropometry helps to understand how much space a relaxed body takes or how does form shape body and vice versa. It suggests that it is the adaptability of body in different environments that make it affordable, like people sitting on flooring in malls and shopping centers. Comparing the broader layouts with zoomed in detail reveal patterns in physical spatiality, body movements, and how people claim and form groupings within these spaces. This comparison highlights how informally created forms, such as those in street markets, shape spaces differently than in pre-designed settings like malls. While street market forms emerge organically around the elasticity of the body, as compared to a mall which was pre-designed, but then bodies adapt themselves or the form. This exploration brings out the dialogue between physical space and human behavior, illustrating how the interplay of type, form, and body shape spaces that people inhabit, transform, and make their own. Thank you.
Thanks, Vatsal. Interesting observations of market types where the zoomed in, zoomed out lenses provide us insights into how the patterns of the markets and the body sort of respond to it. So we move to the next presentation, Sanjita. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Sanjita Patil, and I'm here to present my thesis titled Digital Routines and Their Spatialities. This work explores the ways in which routines are reshaping our personal lives, work environments, and even the physical spaces around us in the city. During an internship in Bangalore, I experienced the profound effects of living within a digital routine. As a newcomer to the bustling tech hub, I, I quickly recognized the need to rely on digital solutions to manage daily life. In a city known for its traffic congestion, long work hours, and high cost of commuting, digital systems became essential. I noticed that the lines between work, social, and personal spaces were blurring, impacting how people interact with their environments. Let's start with what I mean by digital routines. A digital routine is a set of activities we manage through technology, such as checking mails, attending virtual meetings, or ordering food. These routines are invaluable in, in simplifying our lives, but they also introduce digital overload, a state of stress stemming from constant connectivity and the never-ending influx of notifications and digital tasks. While working in Bangalore, I found my office environment shifting from a strictly professional space to a social one. After long work hours, my colleagues and I often lingered in the office, ordering dinner and watching movies together before returning to our task. On weekends, my hostel bed became became a workspace as I sent my mails and joined virtual meetings. Here, the lines between work and personal life nearly disappeared. This blurring space, function, and time is a key aspect of my thesis and a phenomena becoming increasingly common as digital routines redefine traditional boundaries. This blending of activities has transformed our surroundings into what I call as an interconnected ecosystem. Instead of single purpose rooms like offices or bedrooms, spaces have become adaptive hubs that accommodate multiple functions. For example, the kitchen might serve as a workspace during the day and revert to its traditional role by the evening. In cities, the impact is even more pronounced. Workspace now accommodate social gatherings, offices become places for casual meetings, and the need for defined public and private space is shifting. This evolution of space raises the key research question of how do digital routines redefine spatial design principles, shifting from single purpose to multifunctional spaces. How do digital networks influence the balance between personal and professional functions within formally single purpose spaces? To explore these questions, I drew on the works of Beatrice Colomina and Mark Wigley. In his work, Network Fever, Mark Wigley discusses how architecture has evolved to support networks that connect us digitally, moving from static structures to flexible, adaptable environments. Similarly, in the Century of Bed, Beatrice Colomna illustrates how private spaces like bedroom now doubles as spaces for work, socializing, and entertainment, erasing the boundary between rest and productivity. Both the authors highlight that our increasingly networked world is transforming our routines. Work, leisure, and rest are confined to specific times and places, are now interwoven in response to the demands of constant connectivity. This reimagining of time and space forces us to consider how architecture can support continuous engagement while still honoring the need for personal rest and separation. For my research, I analyzed routines of four individuals, each representing different age group, professions, and social cultures, to understand how digital networks impact routine and spatial usage in varied contexts. Uh, for case study one, I studied the routine of Dr. Yashashri Keni, a 45-year-old general practitioner in Thane. Her clinic exemplifies the flexibility of digital spaces, transforming from bustling hub in peak hours to a calm counseling area in the evening. Yashashi's dinner table at home becomes her evening workspace. She stays connected with her patients outside clinic hours using WhatsApp broadcast group that has a network of 200 patients and manages everyday household needs via digital delivery apps. This adaptability allows her to maintain professional and personal roles seamlessly within the same space. Case 2 studies the routine of 36-year-old Siddhi Mulekar, who is in trade business and majorly manages her business from home, starting her day at 1 a.m. from her bedroom. Inspired by Colomina's concept of bedroom office, Siddhi's workspace flows from bedroom to virtual boardroom in a flexible digital routine. Her late night schedule is supported by on demand food delivery apps, which ensures she is fueled without stepping away from her work. Though dinner time becomes the only time where she bonds with her family. Her unconventional work setup allows her to maintain a scheduled routine for shopping for daily essentials like groceries, etc., and limits the use of delivery apps to late night food cravings. Case study 3, Mr. Harish and Mrs. Hema, a couple in their 80s, rely on digital conveniences to balance physical demands with daily routines. They enjoy time outside in spaces like DMart to connect them to the surrounding, but use grocery apps or local home delivery services to avoid heavy lifting. The bedroom is designated to screen free retreat, reinforcing the importance of maintaining boundaries between digital tools and personal well being. Samit Patil, a 54-year-old single working mother, transforms her 3-hour daily commute into productive time by using her car as a fluid workspace. Digital tools and Bluetooth integration allows her to stay connected through calls and mails, seamlessly blending work and travel. This flexible use of digital networks not only optimizes her time, but also demonstrates how technology can redefine the relationship between work personal life and urban spaces in modern work life dynamics. From these cases, we see how digital routines reshape our daily interaction with spaces, creating an interconnected network of physical and virtual environments. Across all studies, digital tools, including delivery apps like Blinkit, stand out as they optimize time and spatial use. These apps operate on algorithms and networks where distribution centers act as nodes in a vast network, allowing rapid delivery that alter urban flows and redefine the spatial characters. In closing, this research provokes us to question how our digitally blended routines are reshaping urban spaces, communities, and even our sense of time. As boundaries between work, leisure, and home dissolve, what happens to our need for dedicated spaces for rest and reflection? And can cities adapt and support healthier, more balanced interactions between digital networks and personal spaces? Ultimately, this study invites us to consider the broader implications of our hyperconnected lives, changing us and the society to reimagine spaces that foster both connection and well being in the increasingly networked world. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjita, in elaborating um, the digital routines that we all follow and um, highlighting the interfaces that we now come across and how they shape our different fragments of our life in different settings and different spaces. So, thanks. I will call upon Krisha.
Hello everyone. Um, the title to my thesis is Building Envelopes, Skins or Surfaces. The thesis talks about changing depths of building skins that make up the outermost layers of the structure. During my internship, I worked in a commercial building for 8 to 10 hours a day. While it was being renovated, we experienced a change from keeping the windows open all day to them being completely sealed with plywood during the repair. This change also affected the atmosphere inside the office, feeling a lack of fresh air, no sense of time, and directing our movement away from the envelope, making it restricted only to the desks. Observing these changes, I saw the buildings with glass facades and panels that completely contained the building, allowing no vision, no natural flow of air, no inhabitation, making it only a surface that covers the building, defining the image of a modern workspace. In a city like Mumbai, the horizontal spaces are planned to every square footage, but these vertical volumes are being that become an important part of the interaction in the everyday are reduced to thin surfaces. This brings me to my question: how do the characteristics of a building skin shape the spatiality of the spaces inside and outside the building? The concepts of building skins, experience of the workspace of the interface, and the image making helped me divide these attributes. These divisions also came from the reading literature on building skins and image formation. After looking at these attributes, I realized they don't exist independently, but overlap with each other in composition of the building skin. The analysis started on the basis of five major attributes that developed further: the image, the climatic responses, the affordances, the resource consumption, and most importantly, material technology. The overlaps between these factors helped me choose my case studies, which allowed me to see these attributes as well. So, with these attributes, I chose 9 buildings over time, out of which I would like to present 5 today. Starting with the Indian Merchants Chamber, an Art Deco building that is located right opposite to the Churchgate railway station. It was built in 1939. The Art Deco building has a language of designing where the skin also becomes important as an element of identity. The entry to the building is a corner opening with a curved porch. The entrance eases the small entrance eases the security of the building, along with a large thickness of the walls and a floor-to-floor height of about 20 feet. With fenestrations and balconies, the building skin thickens to accommodate the functions of increasing the transactional capacity, allowing natural light and ventilation, spatial affordances, and creating the image of the building. In today's time, the building works as an office for the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, with cabins, meeting rooms, and conference rooms from the first to the fourth floor, and cafes and shop fronts on the ground floor along the street. The IMC building allows transactions through the elements such as these shop fronts, the balconies that allow inhabitation, two rows of windows that ventilate the rooms, and large openings that allow visual connect from to the outside. The ground floor keeps the footfall high through the entire day. The ornamented curved balconies also accommodate the services with the changing systems of ventilation. The compound wall and the passage wall becomes an extension to the skin where people wait or the shopfront spills out. The balcony is now covered in certain spaces that becomes a part of the room. And these alterations are possible due to the thickness and the porosity that the skin allows. The second is the Shiv Sagar estate that has five hexagonal shaped office blocks and is located in Worli. With the sea to the west, the complex has a constant flow of wind. Constructed in 1967, the complex is a nine-story high and has shop fronts on the ground floor. These shop fronts have rectangular plans with glass fronts. These are currently occupied by banks and other retail spaces. One of these blocks has a broad rectangular base that goes up to the fourth floor. These blocks have solid walls and fins on alternate sides of the hexagon. With circular RCC columns in the office space, the service core is placed on the rear side of the office. The openings behind the fins are mostly aluminum sliding windows or casement windows that open in the service space, naturally ventilating and lighting it. The ground floor has a passageway that allows for parking space and a walkway before the compound wall. The pavement next to the compound wall has smaller stalls and bus stops that where people are seen spending time outside their office. The vision from and towards the street gets blocked due to these fins, limiting the vantage points. The thick wall also allows for a broader sill. In the service core, these windows are also used as spaces of pause. The natural wind enters through these fins, and these also act as buffer for rains and harsh sunlight. The gap between the fins and the walls also allow for certain services to fit within them. The slab above the storefront also gets some extra space on the first floor where the AHUs are placed currently. This expands the plan on the first floor, uh, changing the skin on all sides of the building. So the road fins perform the function of privacy, light protection from weather, and creating an image of the complex and increasing the transactional capacity. Whereas the other two sides also provide for ventilation and absorb the services. The Siat Mahal, earlier known as the Siat Bhavan, is a privately owned building with a single company working in the whole structure, with lower floors for the offices and upper floors for the management. The building faces the Mahim Bay with stepped terraces on the north. Cladded in Rajasthani stone, the dead wall prevents direct sunlight from the east and the west. With small recessed windows on the south, the building also allows for cross ventilation. Through the angle and the vegetation that forms a gentle border along the compound wall on each floor, the skin facing the road provides a certain amount of privacy. The single covered area becomes the service core on the ground floor, and the stilts form the entryway, where the parking extends within the structure. An external staircase connects multiple floors from the outside. This generally acts as the service or the fire staircase. The curated terraces and plantations give an effect that every floor is a ground floor, uh, providing spaces for pause and opening up the space office beyond the desk and the cabins. One of the earliest buildings in BKC, the Unit Trust of India shifted their headquarters from South Bombay to here. Built in 1996, this headquarters became one of the first buildings to use the tinted glass facade in this area. Along with this tinted glass, Malad stone was cladded in some parts of the building. The depth of the skin changes along the plan. The stone cladded parts are mostly the service core or the common spaces such as the atrium. On the rear side, the corridors. These RCC beams stagger towards the skylight as in the atrium space. The glass fronts in the stone-clad front also light up the common spaces during the day. The only source of ventilation gets reduced to the entrances and the emergency uh, exit doors, making the natural flow of air very limited. The office and the workspaces are then limited to the north and the south wing of the glass, having the glass facades. The structure is supported by RCC columns that are then covered by the tinted glass with aluminum framing. The folding of the skin creates pockets that allows for a formation of cabins and separate workspaces. On each floor, the lower glass panel is a spandrel glass, having an opaque backing. The upper panel is a transparent panel that allows light to enter, but this light focuses only on certain parts of the office. That thus creates a need for curtains and artificial lighting throughout the day. These glass facade also hides several things, providing privacy and creating the image of the modern building. The skin here thickens through these folds but becomes a surface when it comes to increasing the transactional capacity or allowing the flow of fresh air. The JPMC building is a part of the Phase 5 Nilon Knowledge Park in Goregaon. The L-shaped building has recessed glass windows with aluminum composite panel cladding on one part and clear glass with aluminum fins on the other part. The 20-story tower creates an image of the international company that has its office designed over here. The building is raised with recessed windows starting from the sixth floor, and from the ground to the fifth floor, it has clear glass with these horizontal steel members and aluminum framings. Some of these glass panels are openable for emergencies. These glass are layered with thin aluminum fins, which limit the vantage points uh, uh, from the outside. This creates a layer of privacy and shade, but those fins are not wide enough to create a buffer or to absorb or diffuse, thus making them an element of creating an image itself. Same goes with the other fins on the other part, where they provide privacy and shade, but the thickness is so narrow that it remains only as a surface around the containment. The recessed part of the building has a thicker cross section. Replacing the chachas, the panel provides shade to the interiors. The same pattern follows on all four sides of the building. Natural flow of air is again restricted to the emergency exits and the entrances. These entrances are regulated strictly for the employees, thus limiting the flow of air through the space. Um, this uh, the skin also expands around the corridor and the landscape, where uh, there is a row of circular steel columns that makes the skin thicken on the ground floors. Through these cases, I observed several elements that have been a part of the building skins and workspaces in Mumbai over the years. The comparisons have helped me differentiate the attributes that each of them have, allowing for different functions of the skin, such as protection, insulation, excretion, absorption, thermal regulation, and broadcasting of information. Moving from a skin to a surface not only reduces these functions, but the transactions that create the interface between the inside and the outside are also affected, and this affects the everyday life of the occupants. The routine restricts the movement of the people within the building and around the building during the work hours. But if then this skin allows for expansion and alteration over time, the experience is going to change. Through this thesis argument, understanding the layers of the building skin with the changing depths helps me in understanding the need of designing the envelope with the requirements of the site and the building. Thank you.
Thanks, Krisha. It's quite a diverse panel that we have, and I think the thing that gets discussed across all the works, through these interfaces, through the interactions, and through the logics and logistics of these different types and patterns that actually hold life within. Right from observations that zoom in to different forms, or maybe textures and surfaces that actually happen on the outside of the building, to the detail of the types in Vatsal's work, where you look at micro forms to macro forms of organizations. And also, I think the routines that emerge within these patterns, like and also the digital patterns, which are seen and also not seen. The patterns also I think have a very interesting way to look at the uh, the forms that we generally ignore or miss out within the operations of that space. So I think with this, would want to open the panel to Vishwanath and Zarovar. Um,
Okay. So I think as we have been doing whole day, we'll go one by one. So Rishikesh, okay, in a nutshell, if you had to, after doing this study, uh, since you said one of the stores belongs to you, right, your family, if there were no other constraints and if you had to tell your family whether they should shift from a mega store model to a departmental store model or a counterfront store model because the transactional capacities would increase, based on this study, would you be able to make such a statement? To me, I thought was an interesting way of understanding what is it that you're trying to talk from the study. So that was one question. Uh, and while you were presenting, I was also wondering if we change the scale uh, of the counterfront store, uh, or if we just remove the counterfront and turn it sideways, does it turn into a departmental store? And there I've seen, and I'm sure in Mumbai also, there are many Kirana stores or provision stores which are actually counter front, but the counter runs the depth of the shop, right? There's a counter on the depth. So what happens is whatever is stored behind the counter follows the counter front model, and whatever is in this side of the counter, the buyer is free to pick it up and put it on the counter. So to me, that is an interesting mix of a counter front and a part departmental store. Okay, but my question there was, one, if I just, in the case of counter front to department, if I just change the orientation of the counter, in your mind, does it become a departmental store? Does the transactional capacity become one of departmental store? Was to me a very critical question. Similarly, from the departmental store to the mega store, if I just change the scale of the store, does it convert from a departmental store to a mega store? Because in your departmental store also people move from aisle to aisle. Uh, Fair enough, in the actual case study, I think the thing being sold was very different. One is vegetables or groceries, and one is plywood and uh, construction material. Notwithstanding that, if I had to change a departmental grocery store into a mega store which is also grocery, uh, is it just a change of scale or is there something different, was my second question. And my third question, or parts statement, because your hypothesis or question was, do spatial configurations affect transactional capacities? Uh, so, but I would like to ask this question uh, in a much simpler way. Like, let's take the counterfront store, the stationery store. If I want to give suggestions to that store owner, how to increase your transactional capacity, how to increase sales, would you ask them to increase the number of shopkeepers behind the counter so that if there are five people can go back and bring things on the counter? Or would you ask them to increase the area of the store? Okay. Or would you ask them to increase the number of people who are managing the cash drawer? Three options I'm giving you. The same question I would like to ask for the departmental store. If I'm running a departmental store and you want to increase transactional capacities, would you increase the area of the corridors or aisles? Would you increase the number of shelves? Or would you increase the number of billing counters? So to me, framing this question in this way for each of the three stores to me is a good way of answering your research question. In what ways do spatial configurations affect transactional capacities? Because in some case, if I say that increasing the number of shopkeepers will increase transactional capacities, in a roundabout way, I'm saying that it's not so much the spatial configuration, it's something else. But somewhere if you say it's the changing the orientation of the counter that increases transactional capacity, then you're talking of spatial configurations affecting. Yeah. Uh, so those were my questions for you.
Okay, Kashi has asked all the questions, which is great. But I wanted to bring you to this through, in a sense, it cuts across, it's there in his questions, but to bring it to, instead of organizing it through spatial orders, right? Or thinking of entering this through material orders, like what is being sold in each. So, uh, uh, like plywood, this is a very posh plywood store, right? Like usually if you see how like you go to Nal Bazaar and you see the the wood shops there, which is, they're all stacked into this like little, hmm. um, so what, in a sense, how would one start thinking about material culture, materiality, form of what is being sold, and how it impacts the spatial planning? Of course, the person who set up the plywood store is some rich contractor who has been able to, pull it off. But I mean, that's how it works. But like the paper store, like your father's store, right? The first one is what? He's good, good. Rich contractor. Good, good. Um, no, I was just thinking because there's a very stark difference. There's an interest the way that paper is stored. Like as architecture students, I don't know if you guys still go to paper stores, but I go to a paper store near my house. It's a stationery and paper store which actually caters to students of architecture because their hostel is next to it, and it's organized in a way people want to touch the paper. They don't really understand the system of how much is the thick microns and other things. Um, of course, with plywood, that is not the case entirely. Or do people want to touch it? I don't know. Tell the same. Huh.
It is, but in a very different way, because of the scale basically. But it's much more, conversational between the staff or the owner and the customer.
Hardware stores mein hota hai conversation. I also
Yes.
like going to hardware stores because I like to see what I'm buying. I want to see what its functions are. What is the sheen and the shine of, like if I'm buying a tap or something or tiles or whatever. I've not done much plywood shopping. Similarly, like so in a, where there's an interesting connection between the form of the store takes and the material, especially between the paper and the ply. And what will be interesting to see is how smaller, wood traders, etc., actually organizing that store space. Uh, and so somewhere entering it through materiality on the departmental store, the where all the groceries and other things are being sold. Um, you know what? Grocery stores are also very fascinating places because if you go to, in every city, whichever city you're in, like if you're in Maharashtra city, there'll be a whole section which has its local farsan, and Tamil Nadu will have gunpowder and whatever, different things are organized, and there's a certain sense of all grocery stores, even if they're spatially been organized into something which looks posher or whatever, they will always have a local section. No, I was thinking of how one starts comparing this with the digital grocery store, Instamart, Swiggy, how they visually present it. So I'm just saying that the spatial orders, the tangibility of the product, and that relationship with how something gets organized would be, I mean, because also you went on to, you mentioned this book, Typology, on Typology, Oppositions by Raphael Monio. Mm, so I think you've really covered the gambit of spatial typologies in some sense, but not entirely connecting to the material type, the typology of the products. In the sense, you cannot, this is like an architecture student who's saying, oh, dukan, you will know that you, if I ask you, you will be able to say more, but in your work, you have focused so much on the spatial order that I could, if you didn't mention it, it was taking me time to register what is selling what. So it's, and it's always important. Like even people who are in marketing and MBAs, they are part of store design. You know, what do you keep in front? What do you keep at the end? Until like, you know, big malls have that last section bait stuff. Like Decathlon has these things which are 100 rupee bottles and some massager or something. Last minute tak they're trying to pitch you something. So it's interesting to think a little bit more on the materials offered, because you're looking at store, you're looking at transactions, you've done an interesting set of conversations around transactions. So space you've covered, in a sense, people transactions you've covered, objects you are like, yaad nahi reh raha mujhe. I'm just saying that you don't have to, it's a response. It's not a, like I'm like penalizing you for it.
So about the firstly your question about me suggesting something to my parents. So actually starting the first thing that I said, that this interest came up from me growing up around my father's business. That comes because mainly he owned a counterfeit store. So I have seen the transition from that to this. So I would say connecting to the point of Zarover, ki the material or the product also, is important. So because it also comes ki because the business is more diversified now, so it serves better in this kind of a store. But then also it of course offers or provides many more opportunities of various transactions, as I'm comparing between counterfront and megastore right now. So that is why I would actually suggest, not, I mean, this store being a better option in terms of sales and transactional capacities. Um, Another thing was the counter,
Just a clarification. So I hope you're saying it per square meter. Per square meter sales of the counter front store versus per square meter sales of the mega store. Per square meter sales of mega store is more than per square meter. Because absolute terms there is it's an unfair
yeah,
comparison.
yeah, yeah. So another thing, the turning of the counter. I would say the thing is there are multiple kinds of stores in between, coming between counter front, departmental, and mega. So I try to capture these broader ones that include extreme points of these partial arrangements. Of course, if you turn the counter front and then you have that departmental and both happening there. But yeah, that was my main point, to capture a overall spatial configuration affect influence on the transactional capacities. Um, Third being the scale ka question. I think more than the scale, the porosity that one of my inferences talked about, the porosity of the store, that is not really dependent on the scale. So if you look at a departmental store, it forms lanes kind of a spatial configuration inside the store. But then going to the mega store, the circulation and the porosity, the surface of contact becomes much more open, I would say, or fluid. So comparatively looking at these stores, I would say that the interaction, as the interaction between customers and the products increase, the sales and the opportunities also increase. So that is why I would say that the scale doesn't really affect the change from departmental to mega store.
Plywood store, um, it has a lot of people who would be in the construction business, also carpenters. Yeah. So, how, and I mean, I worked on one market in Delhi, which is a hardware market. There was one shop of hardware which suddenly became air conditioned and more organized and everything. And then there were more people like me going there who were getting certain things than carpenters and plumbers. They prefer, like, this is going back to that point on the metro. Okay, so the air conditioned shop or the high, very neatly organized section wala shop. And so somewhere footfall would be changing. But then it's not even aimed for carpenters. It wants to sell bigger.
No. So what happens
Tell your
here
father's
is,
business plan now.
sorry.
Your father's business plan.
So so what's happening here is, in this example, um, the counter in the on the ground floor. So the hardware and the things that a carpenter needs, that is, that transactions happen in the front on the ground floor itself. But yes, as you said, the point of aesthetics and that air conditioning and everything that comes in, so that is also appealing to the other customers that didn't used to happen before, as it was a basement counterfront store. So yes, the aesthetics also comes into play. Yeah. The last question about area and number of staff and number of people running the billing counter, I would say, uh, in terms of people, increasing people, it really is connected to, proportionally thinking of the space also. You cannot just increase the number of people and expect the sales to grow, because I've seen throughout this research and field visits, I've seen some cases where a medical store, which is not really that big of a space, employed a lot of people. That just makes it a hustle space. So that I don't I that is a point of proportionality between the size and the transactions. um, I would definitely say the area of the counter front area really dictates the scale of the space. Area really dictates how the transactions are carried out, because again, as the first point was, if you turn the counter and the transactions multiply. So I think yes, the area would be the first thing. But then again, even if you are given the amount of area, the spatial configuration inside really matters, right? So
I just feel that if you think of answering this question from the simple perspective that you are now giving advice to all three shopkeepers of how to increase their business, and will you, for the countertop, will you tell them to increase the length of the counter, get one more person behind the counter, or change the orientation of the counter? What advice will you give? And similarly for the depart, I think if you, to me, if you frame the question simply, then it forces you to even do the research in that fashion,
right,
right?
right, right.
So what advice if I
So
just take
yeah,
the
yeah,
counter?
yeah, it's understood better now.
Yeah.
Actually, so I would say, of course, the if a counter is just placed in a straight way, I would say increasing the surface of the counter, turning, that might be more effective. But I guess that I would want to question and respond to in my further thesis.
Just to add to the other conversations, the I think you need to also position yourself for what is the question in terms of, is it to deal with the efficiencies or the nature of transactions that you are talking about, like the conversations that led to more engagement from both ends, like the seller and the buyer. So I think that you locate that question for yourself, and I think you would probably be in a position to, you know, kind of understand and, you know, respond to the question of efficiencies and also the nature of transactions. So and I think the point of what material is being sold, because the, like, there are many other and especially if you go to second tier, three tiers, third tier cities, there are many associational values to the material that you are transacting in, like the businesses. And I think that that brings in a lot of other you can say spatial gestures that come into the shop. And I think that would be interesting to add on to your current study. Yeah, I mean, that's.
Yeah. So, Vatsal, moving on to your case. Now, what I found fascinating, these two presentations, one after the other, that one is looking at market types as counterfront, departmental, and mega store, and you are looking at it as street type, shed type, and shopping center type, and tying it to questions of type and typology. Uh, I think one question that both of you might want to think about is, when do when does something become a type? When would you say that it's not a variant but a new type? And in that same vein, when do you introduce something called a subtype? So when you say departmental store and mega store, are they both subtypes of one kind of store, or they are two different types? And same in the case of Vatsal, that to you, are these three equally distinct types that you want to study? I think that's a larger question both the studies pose. Uh, but coming specifically to your study, I was quite intrigued by the study of gestures. Okay, and I always have this grouse when architects, including me, make drawings and draw people in drawings. And because drawings by their very nature are static, what we draw are postures, not gestures. And I found it fascinating that you start with the word gestures in your title itself. But interestingly, while you are presenting, twice you use the word posture. Okay, uh, to me, one way of looking at it is that a gesture without sound is a posture. If I just show you the posture of a human being, I don't know what gesture that person is making. And I feel that, I know there's a limitation of the printed document, but I feel that uh, it is not so much in your plans where you are showing people, but in those views that you showed, even in the mall where someone was sitting under the railing, that I started to sense a notion of the gesture. And I feel that there is a lot more potential in studying gestures in spaces. And it seemed that your study is alluding to that, that the kind of gestures that both the vendors and the buyers make in a street vending type is very different from the gestures that they make. So maybe a description of the nature of interaction between the vendor and the buyer, rather than a snapshot of the posture of the vendor and the buyer, will tell us more about what are the gestures that are made. No? So one will have to discuss, say for example, something like haggling. Haggling involves its own gestures, right? Where I'm trying to negotiate the price. Uh, Maybe it is happening with some street vendors, maybe it's not happening in your shopping center. The same, because your shopping center was air conditioned, that brings in a whole new nuance of, do gestures of people change when they are in a air conditioned space? Yeah? Uh, and I'm sure that when you were studying, you must have observed and documented their gestures as well. So I would like you to talk a little bit about what was the nature of people's behavior uh, through a description of their gestures. So, say, even if I had to articulate it as degree of hand movement, how much my hands moved, uh, rather than talking of whether I was standing, sitting, or crouching, which to me is a posture. How much of pointing happened? कि ये दिखाना versus no pointing happening. Just describing what I want to be shown. Yeah. Show me the thing on the top shelf versus saying, pointing at something and saying, show me. Yeah. Or gestures of, for example, how many things that I pointed at before buying one thing, which happens typically. If you have, I think your shopping center was the one where you said it was uh, clothes and fabric as well. So I was looking forward to it. Typically, when we go to these traditional dress material shops or sari shops, there's lot of gesturing and lot of saris or uh, material comes from the shelf onto the floor, and a lot of times none of it is purchased. I'm wondering whether that entire gesture changed in your shopping center fabric shops, right? Because the like you're saying, the way the racks are displaying material is different and the location of the counter is different. So of course we need to talk of how that spatiality is affecting gesture. Uh, but if you could elaborate a little bit more on what were the gestural changes that happened?
Actually, interestingly, both your studies talk to each other and don't talk to each other. So yours is so obsessed about spatial programming or plan, that, I mean, I think you've kept some conversations, but you've not gone into this, because when people talk across a counter, they'll say, "Ki wo nikal ke dikha do," right? While when you walk through a shop where you can look, it's very different how they behave. It's weird. Also, what's a, it's a very, I really like your study. It's totally up the alley of anthropology. So, um, there was a question I had which I have now forgotten, but I will come to it. Hold on. So this, um, in a sense, you try and look at human behavior, um, and because you are drawing it out, as Kashi was saying, you draw the image out, and there are certain aspects of what happens in of the body in the market. So I saw there was one part of your presentation, maybe you've included in it, where you had listed anthropometry, you had listed, kahan pe hai wo? It was an interesting listing, and you had kind of broken it out into pieces to be able to put a set of things across it. What I felt that you kind of then didn't do that, what does it come together collectively? You know, so the actor, the networks, the, everything is, the space is there, the drawings are there. So what happens when, what is the like you, for example, he said bargaining. You know, when you're in a market in on the road, you will you will walk away for as a part of bargaining. You'll say कि नहीं नहीं लेना नहीं लेना नहीं लेना, they'll say कि नहीं नहीं अच्छा मैं 100 में दे दूंगा, 100 में दे दूँ. Then you'll play the game, and then they will play the game. There's a kind of ephemerality to that game. Also, there is a lure which is very differently done. You know, like if you go to some street markets, etc., you know, सौ का छः type of thing. And you mentioned some of these slogans in this, right? So, since you looked at anthropometry, how do you integrate what he was like, the anthropometry gesture, the spatial, the design? You know, the idea of the shop design is very something that one had looked at in just that square. It's a sheet of paper. It's a, in Bombay. There's a lot of blue tarp that is used, right? They put that below and sometimes they put it up on top also. Um, so in that much space, what is the kind of shop you're generating? Are you doing a, like, supposing one shop can have a pile of things, and that abundance is the lure, you know, कि ये सब t-shirt मिल रहा है इतना सारा. And then there's some shop guys who are on the street but they will organize it very, like, you know, vegetable guys always organize separate, they don't like this cluster approach. So and then how does the person who's there respond to this? How are they drawn? How are they walking away? What is forms of communication, bargaining, movement? There's a lot of it actually there in your thing. I think you've not written some of it out. Some of it you have. Similarly, of course, how bodies definitely change in uh, formal spaces, formal markets. Like you, because there is no bargaining. In malls, I always feel there is a lot of boredom. There's always some man sitting there on looking at his. There's a lot of like couples who've gone to a mall because it's AC and whatever, and then there's a sense of boredom to it. While you can never, you don't even cannot even think of being bored in Dadar market. कच्चा खा जाएंगे आपको. Do you get it? The that sense of stillness cannot come because that spatial order, the social order, the urgency of selling, buying, and also somewhere thinking of the idea. So you can look at some of the work of a colleague of mine called Sampriti Pani. She's written her thesis on markets, and there's an idea she works as bazaar karna. So there's a joy to going to the market, like, you know, even to buy vegetables. I mean, there are also jokes like इंडिया में पहले बोलते हैं कि बेटा हो गया तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, लेकिन what is the बेटे का role when he's 15? अच्छा नींबू और वो ले आना, धनिया ले आना. You know, like all the joy of having a son is gone too. So I'm also like, you know, you'll see older people doing the bazaar karna part of it. So is very, it's there in your thing. It comes in some resonances, but I think the drawing has also distracted you a little bit, right? But you drawn out these scenes of the women shopkeepers, you know, and how they're using that motorcycle, etc., or scooter. So Bazaar Karna, which is also connected to his thing, and what we think when we go to shop something, whether it is plywood, paper, sabzi, sweater, whatever, right? तो वो उसके और उस how does that speak to these different spatial orders? How does it speak to class differences? Space changing so quickly from outside and inside, like in the metro station and the, you know, train station difference that she had shown earlier. So it'll be interesting if you, I mean, your drawings are great, very nice, these little people. uh, yeah, this is all I had to say, but yeah, it's very interesting. Malls में there's also something to do with the floor. This is something I malls make you tired faster. People are looking for a spot to sit and there are always lesser spots to sit. Sometimes people go to malls and don't buy anything. Right? People just go to the mall because it's there and it's a part of a certain aspiration, etc.
So to first answer, how does something becomes a type? So even while I was looking, this was a question. So I was looking at through patterns which then get emerged, like patterns of groupings, patterns of claims, and the patterns which the forms which then happen for them setting up shops. So when then those forms and those patterns when then get repeated, those are what makes the form. So then those four forms emerge. Also like to understand how gestures and postures, so that was also a query which I was finding, to how to draw out the gesture. So I tried to follow that narrative method where So one posture or the one keyframe is what I tried to draw out, and then what leads to that gesture or the conditions which generate those gesture. Like if it's a low display setup, then the vendor tries to sit on a lower stool. But then buyer also, to get an access to it, he sort of bends. But in the shed market, the form allows it for on a platform. So then the gesture sort of completely change, where like there is no more bending, but there is going directly into the bargaining wala thing. But also if you see, like for the first two types, you can like walk along the aisle and sort of bargain, and then if you don't want to buy, you leave. So then there is that ease with which you can buy, as compared to the Indraprasth, where you have to enter to a particular shop, and then saying no, or not bargaining then becomes a much more difficult thing. Because yeah, because then you are almost into that closed enclosed pocket of the conversation which happened. So the gestures do happen usme, but the amount of the bargaining which happens feels very forced. And like because also you have to enter that shop and buy, as compared to the mall, which like the price tag is that much. If you want to buy, you can buy. If you don't want to buy, you just like stroll around, which most of the people do. So then that makes another form of gestures where there is no there is of course a cashier which happens at the back, but when you are interacting with the product, the gestures or buyers, you like hardly sort of feel it. But most of it happens from the price tag, which is already there on that while that interaction happens.
Just feel that if I pick on one thing you said, where you said that when the vendor is on the floor, then you have to bend down, right? To me, that is still a postural thing. What will convert it into a gesture? If I'm sure you would have also shopped uh, from people who are on the floor in the street versus those who are on the cart, right? So what happens when the merchandise is on the floor? When you look down, in the same frame of view, the shopkeeper is looking up at you. So you cannot escape eye contact even if you want to check कि उसके fruits अच्छे हैं या नहीं. In that same eye contact, so the shopkeeper pleads, either speaks or through their eyes, they try to draw your attention. What happens when the it is cart? And if the vendor is standing, I can look down without looking up. I don't have to make eye contact. I can directly check the wares without making eye contact. And so you will see that vendors who are on carts, they call out to you more than vendors who are on the floor. To me, this is converting a posture into a gesture. The enactment that happens, because of the spatiality of it, the gestures change. The way you look at it and the way the vendor looks at it changes. So I'm sure you would have observed. So I think for each of the times you're mentioning posture, if you can just convert it into gesture, keep in mind that if you're describing it as body positions, it's posture. How much ever in detail you describe. Okay, one knee is bent and one knee is straight. No, that is also posture. Right? You have to describe it in time, not frozen in time.
Add to what you were saying, I think it's also beyond the interaction between the buyer and the seller. I think in um, the setting that this happens, it forms, like the drawings also suggested, certain clusters which happen of different types of bodies, and not just in terms of either gender or form or shape or class, but in terms of what they were actually doing in that position at that particular given moment of time. Now, I think if you see from different types, that how these clusters also form, it was not about either one transaction or one interaction, but also to do with how things or how people came together and what it formed. So I think the market in your case seems a little limited in terms to discuss but I think it opens up to other forms of gestures where I think what Sarovar was saying, that you get bored in the mall. And I think the whole gestures of body in the mall were actually the result of a boredom that they were trying to sit in the alleys with the uh, glass railings and other things. So, I mean, it might be helpful to kind of open that in.
Oh, um, I mean, there are readings like the practices of everyday life, Michel Dessertu. Also, you can actually very interestingly use a bit of Walter Benjamin's work on um, this eye contact thing that Kashi said was reminding me of. It's like that you're beholden in that eye contact. That is, like you will continue to have that conversation, and and there's a very interesting. It's very transitory, but it's also something that holds you for that much time. While in a bigger shop which you are going into, I mean, I'll end up buying things out of guilt because somebody has shown me five things, and I'm like, oh my god, I have to buy, so much tension. So, but this, Walter Benjamin has this thing on the stranger where people walking across a road see each other, and for 5 seconds there's a kind of location of intimacy or whatever, a bond is established. And I think the nuances of this posture, gesture, etc., in the marketplace, you going towards it very strongly. It would be interesting if you look at these. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, Sanjita, your study on digital routines and spatiality. The first question I had was, is any activity a routine? So, in that sense, I wanted to understand from your perspective when you are doing this study, are you interested in how internet has changed human behavior, or is it about digital routines that we have? Because to me, any activity is not a routine. It becomes a routine when you do it without thinking and you do it repeatedly, right? So different people have different routines. So if someone has a scheduled Zoom call and they are doing it in their house, it's not routine. I know of some people for whom doing a Zoom call, especially during the pandemic, had become so routine that without thinking, they would open their personal meeting room the first thing in the morning when they started their laptop. Now that is routine. I think for now, for a lot of people, getting up and switching on or unlocking your phone has become a routine, right? Or taking your phone to the toilet has become a routine for many people. These are routines, and which we are doing subconsciously. And to me, that's a fascinating study, asking what are these new digital routines and what is it doing to our imagination of the space, right? You want to then tie it to spatiality. I felt that a lot of what you described was more about the daily life of people after the coming of the internet and after using or being in a situation where you're doing a lot of things online. And what does that mean? So when you whether you talk of Amazon Zomato on one hand, or that person who is doing a lot of things um, digitally on the phone, like work from home. But I'm more interested in what digital routines have done to the space of the house, for example. Has the spatiality of the living room changed because of digital routines? Because I increasingly see that in families, doing things on your phone is so much routine that people are sitting in the living room next to each other, but it is not a space of congregation. It's a space of isolation. You're all on your phones. Uh, I see another example of routine to me is invariably it happens that everyone is on their phone and everyone is not wearing headphones. And so suddenly one person's Insta reel comes up and there's loud music, and the other person is looking at something and suddenly is disturbed from their routine, because there's a dissonance between what I am doing on the phone and a reel popping up, right? What does that do to the idea of the living room if you're talking of it in the setting of a house? To me, is a fascinating question, because digital routines have completely shifted the way we look at the house, the way we look at personal space and shared space in the house. And there could be interesting arguments about what these routines do. Is very, to me, would be a very different study from, say, if someone did a study of post COVID issues with houses where everyone had their own Zoom call and there was sound disturbance happening. To me, that's a different kind of study, because it does not involve the routine aspect of it. There's an intentionality to it. So I felt that your study could have been much sharper if you looked at routine. I'm sure maybe you looked at it. It's just that in the presentation, both here and there, it didn't come across as routines. And the tying of it to spatiality. Uh, because making that generic statement that digital routines have altered the way we interact or inhabit with our surroundings, fair enough. I think most people accept that. But it would be important to us how it has altered the way we inhabit our surroundings or interact with our surroundings.
I think your study is interesting, but it has one of the main things that is actually there and not there is this COVID, post-COVID human. Uh, I don't know. I mean, at least my generation, I had never seen reels before COVID, and that pleasure of endlessly, what is it called, when you go into the dark hole of reels, doom scrolling. It's fantastic. So this doom scrolling thing is also a post-COVID phenomenon, as far as I know. At least my generation never had. No, the interesting thing is to think of what is, because COVID is mentioned nearly in all of stories, but there is a, because everybody was forced to be together in a space, and then everybody still wanted alone time. Also, this whole thing of things. I mean, Netflix, TV watching, it was a social activity in the house, which then becomes that everybody sitting on their laptops or their, you know, parents are watching some weird YouTube videos and kids are watching some Netflix series. Um, and a kind of a, it breaks a spatial order inside the house. The presence um, of a device which has internet and the network, etc. It also generates beds where there were no beds. You know, everybody also just lie down on in places and doom scroll. Like I basically sit in my outside drawing room the same way that I'm in the bedroom, just in psychologically thinking at least I've gotten out of my room. Okay. So, but the other thing that is interesting to see is that I now have a fear of the laptop, because the laptop became the place of work, of pleasure, like now, in a sense, watching Netflix for 2 years. One is teaching classes on it. It's also the workplace. So this thing of people working online, um, the idea of work changes, right? Earlier, your laptops were used for either making a presentation, writing something, or connecting with, sending an email. Now it's like, oh my God, there's a whole set of people with Zoom calls lined up. The anxiety of that. like literally, like I literally did not like the merging of so many. So I have not downloaded like Zoom and other things on my phone, except that now there's WhatsApp video group calls. Oh my god, like just keep destroying my life. So you can't say anything. Ki, nahi, I can't come online. You. So what would be interesting is to think of this as how did technology change this human spatial zone, or whatever, internet or whatever you want to call it, in a post-COVID era, and we experience the debris of it, or the presence of it, the continuity of it. Um, and if you really want to think about kind of the house spatial orders and apps and other things, like I did not have Swiggy, Instamart, and all that through the pandemic. I actually got it because like one of my friends was like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, I can't order from some random place, right? Like I need my eggs from the local guy's shop. I can walk down. So, to I think looking at routines of change as the interface part, I think because you've captured a lot of routines with it, but what is it binarying against? You know, where is that the tenacious tension, the tension of, is this the form of life that we have always inhabited? Is this now, like before, the bachelor pads used to have, there'll be one single bed, then there'll be one strange rack in one corner. Hmm. Now everybody is happy with the bachelor pad, and it could be in a fully, 5 people household. Everybody just wants a bachelor pad and internet connection and whatever, and everybody's doom scrolling. So what does it, I'm saying in a larger sociological sense, in the sense of the future of social space of family, like 5 people of the family are literally sitting, and this can happen with families, it can happen with friends groups also. The kids will go to like some like river front, and they're all playing some online ludo, like सामने sunset हो रहा है, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा किसी को. So, in the sense, the psychic social life and the contrasts of it, I think that it'll be, I think you did some interestingly intense क्या कहते हैं ना, diagrams, everyday routine. And ये बहुत difficult होता है ये सब map करना, हाँ. So I mean, you did it. Uh, like for me, breakfast time is now a time for doom scrolling. I don't like people in my house at breakfast time. आई वॉन्ट टू हैव माई चाय कॉफ़ी आराम से. सो तुमने इसमें बहुत क्लियर कैटेगरीज बना दिया है. तो वो फॉर्म ऑफ लाइफ वो चिपका हुआ है, वो अलग अलग तरह से चिपका हुआ है, और वो कुछ चीज़ें तोड़ भी रहा है आसपास. सो आई मीन जस्ट थॉट थिंग्स टू थिंक अबाउट ऑफ दिस. सो इट इज़ स्टिमुलेटिंग स्टडी, but I feel like I want all the contrasts and the comparisons and the tensions and things left out.
Um, so starting with what you asked about it, I was initially looking at the digital routines itself. So my method of interviewing these case studies was I just spent an entire day with them and just observed their day for like one whole day. And so in middle I used to ask them questions like how much of your work is dependent on digital or whatever. So my first case study was the doctor. So while I was sitting with her in her clinic, she was like, no, I need the personal touch for patients, while she was texting a prescription to a patient. So it very involuntarily happens because at that point in her clinic there are very less patients, or the frequency of patient is very less in evening time. And that sort of just texting to the remaining messages or responding to her patients on her broadcast group becomes her routine in that specific time. um, also about uh, what digital routines have done to the spaces in the household. So I feel the living room space is has become a very fragmented space, so as like considering the social conversations or the socialization that happens there. So living room spaces, initially it is uh, all of all of the living room spaces is structured so as, you know, the sofas are pointing to one another, which is to initiate conversations, uh, or half of the sofas are pointed to the TV so as to watch the TVs. But the things that I observed was people are just lying on the sofas and scrolling or binge watching Netflix while the TV is on, or while three people are sitting besides them in the living room. But there are very fragmented sets of lifestyles that happen within a household. And also so yeah, talking about the post-COVID thing that she said, uh, that of course the influence of those digital routines and everything being just available has been more after the during the COVID, and these are the remains of it. But what happened during the COVID time was everything was we had to do things digitally because it was the like that's what the situation demanded for it. And now it is like the remainance of those situations. So I think what these overlapped routines does is it doesn't allow us to switch on and switch off. Like if one person is in her bedroom and she is working, and then she wants to watch TV, there is no mental transaction or a psychological switch off that happens from her work and then she's binge watching. It doesn't happen. So it also leads to many of like lot of mental burnout because of these overlapped routines.
I understand what you're saying, and which is factually true. No, I was talking of something different. Let me explain through an example. So, when I was studying in primary school, I had two teachers. Both came on time to class, did their class, and went away. But it was very clear that for one teacher, teaching was a routine act. कुछ भी हो जाए वो टीचर आके वही चीज करती थी. It's not so much that वही चीज करती थी. For her it was a routine. She didn't have to think about it. And for another teacher, every class was a different opportunity. Sometimes she would come and spend 20 minutes rearranging the student कि तू यहाँ बैठ तू वहाँ बैठ. Nothing to do with studies. Some other day she would not do it. Now, if I map that as a daily routine, दोनों टीचर का रूटीन ऑन पेपर सेम है, पर एक के लिए वो रूटीन है और एक के लिए वो रूटीन नहीं है. So I'm saying even when we deal with the phone, for some people some acts of being in the digital world are routine, and for some people they are not routine. I'm talking of that kind of routine.
Just slightly inner intestine workings of the phone. So now Instagram has become like WhatsApp. It's insane. It's damn irritating. Like people message on like people stay in touch on Instagram more than on WhatsApp. And then like I don't want to open my Instagram anymore. I want to open my phone and play maybe a good game, block doku or something that architecture students play. But I don't want to go to Instagram. I'm like, oh my god, itna kachra. Okay, and the thing is, then there's that whole Instagram politeness. You have to like the reels that have been shared, etc. So no, the reason I'm saying this is that I mean, you can also just check people's phones and see how much hours they've spent on. Oh my god, it's so disturbing when that comes, uh, because it'll say you have spent 5 hours 52 minutes a day. I don't know how much you guys are doing. I don't know what young people are doing, but um, yeah, this routine thing is, and then who is seeing it? Like you're these two teachers, one's method is different, but they're both routines, aren't they?
I'm not sure
Huh.
whether for both teachers it's a routine.
But I think it's also about the layers which are overlaid on the routine. Like his example of going to the toilet in the morning with your phone. Now the digital has replaced the time that you were actually doing something else. You're stationary, but you know, and there are many such small pockets in the day that get overlaid with either the digital or other forms of engagements that one has. And the digital has taken over quite a few of these, like you could sit in a living room and kind of ponder over things or just not do anything. Even the space of nothingness kind of takes over by the doom scroll which happens. So that's one layer. And I think routine may be understood in very say regimental terms, but I think routine not just um, it doesn't kind of configure the day in a repeated sequence of things that happen. But I think that what parts of the routine gets either replaced or taken over or layered by say a digital way of doing, like for example going to the market and ordering it from say a Swiggy genie. Now what does that do to your like time that was you spent in another space or moving out of the house to something that you probably now either doom scroll or spend time. So it kind of some ways compensates and becomes the or slowly starts taking over the time that you did something else. So your engagement to a certain kind of space while shopping now is replaced. I mean, you're still shopping, but you're not in that space. You're somewhere else. And I think that these layerings, I think, would be interesting to then sort of look at.
Looks cheaper online. Yeah, it's very scary. Like bananas, everything looks cheaper online for some reason. Also the irrational Instagram shopping. Oh my God, things I have ordered in that. But there is a, I think because the digital, I think if I was buying from a sabzi wala, half a kilo tomatoes for 50 rupees, I'll say, Bhaiya, itna price बढ़ गया. And in Instamart, if it's for 50 rupees for half a kilo, I'll be like, oh, this is not bad. It's it's very psycho, man. All this digital stuff. I mean, I think you need to layer it way more. And these routine maps तो मैं बनाए बड़े फंडू से, लेकिन उसको थोड़ा उसमें you have to build in spokes across it. First. Oh my God, very tough. My God, you looked at so many buildings. Your name is Krishna. Krisha. Krisha. It is tough because she's gone from skin all the way to the intestines of the buildings. I thought she was going to stay at skin. Then I was able to handle it. But no, I found your work interesting from the point of view of like history of architectural facades. Um, and what is the actually you looked at buildings from so many different periods, or you didn't do a single building like BKC type. कहाँ है BKC type building? कहाँ है? वो भी पुराना चेम्बर कुछ करा होगा. कहाँ? अच्छा,
No, there are two of them from
यूनिट
BKC
ट्रस्ट ऑफ इंडिया हेडक्वार्टर्स. हाँ, अरे वाह.
and the diamond market.
The ships of BKC. I used to work in one of them. Acha, very interesting. I mean, this is a very, I mean, for me, how I read your work, and since you have so many different buildings, this is a very interesting reading of history of commerce and history of architecture going together, and how from like this, uh, Bombay has brutalism light. Delhi has brutalism strong. So from this early, then you also have all this art deco, the debris of the Indian Ocean trade, the deco buildings that becomes the Chamber of Commerce and etc. Moving to the Kadri building was built in 1970. There is a very interesting history of architecture for me in your work. Okay, 70s, 80s, the like architects who were very doshified and everything um, had started moving to there's a kind of a nature movement. Korea's has started doing things in Bharat Bhavan comes in the 80s, and I really I that's how I connect to this presentation and this work. It is presents the and then it ends with your the final, the shining shimmering Shanghai. I call it the Shanghai Tower syndrome in BKC, where everything uh, is glass facade. And what was interesting, the Makers Chambers 1980, and there's a very strong presence of balconies in earlier, huh? And वो खत्म हो जाता है. Interesting building that went through its own identity crisis issues was the Churchgate station. I don't know if you ever came across what happened. So they put these glass panels, right? Um, Very similar to the NDMC building in Delhi. They put these metal panels on top, and they thought they'll put some shining lights, and it started falling in the rains. And what happened in Churchgate was that it became really suffocating inside, because for people who were working there, finally they I think changed, they took them off. So they wanted it to look very shiny and like with the times, and it didn't work. Yeah, I mean, I think I see your book. This is your book as a history of architecture and business and aspirations of, and it's very nice because the range actually goes all the way back towards, you know, the of how buildings in South Bombay, early businessmen used to do things, to global capitalism ki sheen.
Yes. So after your presentation, the first question that came to my mind is, according to you, when is a surface not a skin? But I do see that in your written document, both in the abstract and in the inferences, you make some allusions to it where you say that skin can contribute to a changing climatic condition both inside and outside. And when reduced to a facade or a surface, the interface reduces to an elevation. So there you seem to be making that statement that surface is not a skin. And when you're talking of skin, you have to primarily talk of, like with the human body or any body, what is it that it allows in and what it does not allow in. Whereas when you talk of the surface, you are primarily talking of the visual aspect or even textural aspect. So architecturally, I would imagine that when you're talking of the skin, you're primarily drawing a section. And when you're talking of a surface, you're primarily drawing an elevation, which also somewhere you mentioned. But then I'm quite intrigued that the thesis cover is a skin, not a skin, but a surface, which is very interesting. Although in the inference, you're drawing primarily sections. So you're talking of the skin. Where it gets a bit sort of muddled for me is that even in the inferences where you start saying that methods of working are changing over time, and so should the use of the skin. Okay? Uh, so I see two different ways in which you can make this argument. One, where you are saying that the role of the skin has changed over a period of time, and the skin no longer need to perform the same interface functions that it used to before. Okay, because someone else has taken the role of the skin. If I talk of the human body, for example, I could make an argument that clothes have taken over some of the role of the skin, so the skin doesn't have to do that anymore. Uh, but then it is not clear both in your presentation or your document what role of the skin has vanished over a period of time, if it has vanished, and who has taken up that role of the skin. Yeah? Or for that matter, if you are saying that some roles of the skin have been added over a period of time, what are those roles? Because somewhere when, even in your inference, when you start talking of how modern your BKC examples, they have just become glass facades and image, you're talking of how it has become a surface, but you're not talking of what it is not doing. Because the counter argument from the clothes analogy people will make is that the air conditioner has taken away the role of thermal regulation from the skin, and therefore it's okay. Because when we have, humans have started wearing clothes and sweaters in winter, we are saying that it's okay if the skin doesn't take care of it, the sweater will take care of it. Okay. To me, the second clue of that sort of confusion comes when, I mean, on one hand, I was quite fascinated by, in all of these sections you're drawing, you have these 8 different things that you talk of, right? Transactional capacity, privacy, light ventilation, resource consumption efficiency, but image is also one of them. Okay, so I'm quite intrigued that this framework that you are developing for your analysis, are these roles of skin and surface put together, which is why you have put image also in there, as well as light ventilation as one and light as the other. Okay, my second question is, so if I just take your framework, since each of the sections, the color coding, or rather the length of the bar is different. So I'm assuming you're saying that for some sections, it is transactional capacity is more, or light and ventilation is more or less. What are you implying from that modification? So I wish that the inference also had the same color coding all drawn together across the edges. And if I'm saying that the yellow bar is reducing, for example, so spatial affordance is reducing, what is your uh, critique of the skin then? Are you saying that the skin is less of a skin because spatial affordance is reducing? Okay. Or should I interpret this diagram as the length of the total bar is all the roles of the skin put together? It doesn't matter if one role increases or reduces, because it depends on who is inside. So there my analogy is, if I take a mammal skin and a reptile skin has to perform different functions because reptiles don't thermoregulate, right? Whereas mammals do. So are you making that kind of argument that because the skin is covering different types of animals inside, the nature of the skin itself has changed? Because that could be another argument. That, so I just felt that after doing, I agree, after doing this sort of rigorous study of multiple buildings, your inference on the skin I wish was sharper, and I'm sure there is material there to make that. I just feel that because you're not using this diagram to make an inference, your inferences are becoming very generic, saying that earlier the skin was doing climate this, it was more articulated, now it has become a glass tower. I don't think you need to do this much research to say that, right? Through your research, you can tell us something much more sharper about uh, the skin.
Thank you so much for the comments. And there are a lot of things that I could further work on in this for sure. And so I have tried to look at the role of the skin over time through these cases. And so I tried to map out these attributes and how they have been. As in, I'm not looking at it through a design or a inhabitation. Like, it is not just one thing that is uh, characterizing it or factorizing it, that these are the things that I considered while designing, the architect considered while designing, or this is the only way that inhabitation is happening, so I'll look at it only through that. So I've tried to look at both of them, and through these things, like there are also a lot of factors such as the DCPR and all those things being introduced that reduce the spatial affordances, and you cannot like the spatial affordances can be created through other ways that uh, like in the newer buildings that I feel is reduced. So that is why I had made those comparisons in the bar graphs. And yes, in the inference, if I could compare them, it would have been really helpful. So, and what roles are added and what are what have vanished is that is why I started with those attributes that these I actually I started with the attributes very independently, but then I realized that all of these cannot exist independently when it comes to skin, and especially when a building skin, all of these attributes are going to be there. Even if it's a glass facade, there is a certain amount of depth, and like it allows for light, not for ventilation, but it allows for light. So that is how these attributes are somewhere or the other going to overlap and come within it. So none of them are vanishing or uh, increasing, but it is also the amount that is allowed and amount that is restricted.
Just also talk about, I'm quite intrigued that image is one of those things
So,
in the attributes of the skin.
right. A surface can be a part of the skin, the outermost layer, but it can like skin is thicker than the surface because it allows more functions. So that is my argument that the image will be a part of the skin because for as humans as well, the fairness of the skin or the growth of hair on the skin, all of those things are also a part of the skin, right? As much as the layers beneath it.
Find the image, this part very fascinating because if you track from your first building to the last, each of them is responding to a sense of the global of that time. So the that first building is got the deco style thing. Then in the middle there is this kind of light, as I said, light socialist architecture thing happening, form function dominating in a sense, concrete, RCC, etc. Then it moves towards the glass facade, right? And this kind of like very jazzy Dubai resonance buildings. And it's actually continuously responding to an image of trade, what it means to be in a global trading city at different times. And I think what happens is because in architecture we're thinking of functionality, form, etc. Like the first place that I thought of this idea, and Kashi, since you were asking about it, was actually in the Bora redevelopment plan. So in the Bora redevelopment plan, why did they want to build something which looked so shiny and so big? So they said that we are using elements of the Fatimid architecture, but that's just very sprinkled on some ledges and some buildings. But it's basically a response to Singapore, to Dubai, to the idea that we are not part of some other, we are part of a global culture rather than a local sense of, and that architecture becomes then a performance in that, in a public space. So, and also interestingly, you have looked at business chambers and all kinds of things. So, even the one that the Kadri one, which is interesting because it has all this so that's also responding maybe to a moment of that, oh, we're supposed to be a little bit more thinking about bringing nature in, except that you should see the building of the environmental thing in Delhi, like the office of it's completely glass facade. It's just based on running, but they want to make it. It's in Lodi Road. You can look at that building. It's a very hideous building, and it's the Indian whatever in a sense chamber for environment and something something, and it is fully glass facade, fully like looks like it has no, like habitat center looks more meaningful to be in probably a office for international office for environmental regulation, etc., than this building. But that image thing, it's very much part of it, haunts the architecture form each time.
I'm not saying image is not important. Let me put it this way. I might put makeup on my face. I don't put makeup on my stomach. Okay, both are skin. I might put moisturizer both places if I live in a dry climate. Putting moisturizer is taking care of the skin. Applying makeup is a surface quality. So I'm saying that if you do a study on why apply makeup here and not, you are talking of surface. Even though it's applied on the skin, it's a surface question. And the other question is a skin question. So I'm intrigued that you put the image in the skin question is all I'm saying. I'm not saying that's not important. It is important.
Also, like another layer to this, like also the skin is a question of um, covering, or is it a question of form? Because I think the more you like, what does it do? Like, we always talk of skins as interfaces, that it exchanges a few things. Skin also has its own um, you know burdens that it has to take care of, no? It has to kind of deal with the climate and other things, and then there is life inside which is happening, and life outside which is happening. So each period, I think what you were discussing about, I think it responded to that times inside and the outside. Because today's time, there will be a question to me if I want a balcony or no. Because of the level of pollutions which are there, maybe it's only some seasons that one may want to kind of enjoy a certain kind of weather, especially the current situations in Delhi, what's really happening. So that's one, like the question of relevance. What I want to come at is like, what is relevant today as a question for skins, even though when you're coming from this long list of um, examples you have seen from a certain time period. So I think adding that layer would be nice. And also, the I just want to kind of, the last thing I want to say is, the like Mark Wigley says, like the body, a human body, is only it's an image that one sees. But biologically, if you see, there are so many bacteria on the surface of the skin, you don't know where the bacteria end and the human body starts. So, I mean, why I'm saying this is just like that we kind of see that image question kind of makes architecture seen in certain ways. I think maybe when you're thinking of the question of the relevance of the skin, like you also look at the relevance of the image, like what that building really, cleanliness, or yeah. So yeah. So yeah. So, shall we take questions from the audience, if there are any questions from anyone? Yeah, it's a long, we've discussed quite a few points, yeah, yeah, in this length of the panel. So, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Vishwanath and Sarovar. We'll meet you again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and continue from there on. So, thank you all.